Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, welcome, bienvenue. Quiero dar la bienvenida.
I would like to welcome, on behalf of the GEF, Green European Foundation, the La Casa Encendida, and the Spanish Association of Ecological Agriculture, as well as Transición Verde, to the experts who are here with us today, but also everyone who has connected to such an interesting day. I would like to remind you all of some logistic details so that we make sure that everything will work correctly. Today's session will take place both in English and Spanish. If you want to listen to the translation, you have a little globe icon at the bottom of your screen where you can choose the channel. We will have 3 extraordinary speakers. They don't even need a presentation, and you are going to be able to ask questions during the second part of the session. You only need to write your questions on the chat, and we will be asking the question later on. So with no further ado, we are going to start. And I wanted to thank you all for being here today. So we live in a world that produces enough food, but 800 million people are hungry the world over. The food system is inefficient and cannot cover all basic needs of the population. It is irrational and it is unsustainable. Despite some medium-sized and small-sized initiatives, the system is dominated by corporations that see food as a product with which they can speculate and a source of financial profit. And that is what is causing a risk for the world food safety. So we consider that food sovereignty is a difficult challenge, if not impossible. Vandana Shiva is one of the most prestigious and influential women in ecology and ecofeminism. She's a doctor in physics, a philosopher, and a writer. She has written numerous articles and books. I'm only going to mention a few of them. Who Really Feeds the World, Biopiracy, The Plunder of Nature and Knowledge, Globalization's New Wars, and Stolen Harvest. Vandana, there are ideas in your book, especially in Who Really Feeds the World, such as the conflict between the paradigm of agroecological and industrial agriculture and the technology and the violence against nature, the corporate greed and control of seeds, the new green revolution, its possible replica in Africa. So there are lots of different topics that you tackle in your book, and I would like you to tell us a bit more about it.
Thank you so much. Yes, the crisis of chemical industrial agriculture is what has drawn me into this field in 1984, because I had studied in the state of Punjab. I had done my MSc honors in particle physics at Punjab University, and it was a peaceful state and a prosperous state, the most prosperous part of India. And by 84, it was exploding. And so I wanted to study it, and I did a study for the United Nations University, and a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution was published as a result. But what I learned then, and what I've learned since 84, is this, that industrial agriculture is not agriculture. Agriculture is care for the land. Industrial agriculture is war against the land, against the farmers, and against the eaters, because it came out of war. Every agrochemical is derived from Hitler's Germany, the IG Farben, which was the chemical cartel, which had links with Standard Oil across the ocean. Monsanto and Bayer were together. DuPont worked with IG Farben. And it's after the wars, they turned towards agriculture and said, why don't we apply these war chemicals to farming? And totally changed what agriculture was. And that's what I have realized in my study then and my study since then. It's really a group of 4 poison cartel, 4. And they have their roots in Hitler's Germany, and they continue to shape agriculture policies. So the first Green Revolution was really forcing chemicals on the Third World. The first time it was done was India, in the land of Punjab. It destroyed water in the land of 5 rivers. It destroyed the soil. It devastated the farmers. The farmers were protesting in 84. Farmers are still protesting till today, because they said this is an agriculture of slavery. where we can't decide what we'll grow. We don't decide how we'll grow it. We don't decide when the waters of our rivers will come to our fields. We don't decide what price we will sell our produce. These are all conditions of slavery. They defined industrial farming and green revolution as slavery in 1984. We then have the second green revolution with the claim that GMOs will reduce chemicals and be a miracle for farmers. We have instead lost 400,000 farmers to suicide. 85% are in the areas growing cotton. 90% and more, but 99% now, of the cotton is GMO BT cotton. It's called the second green revolution. It did not manage to control pests. We have more pests, new pests, more pesticide use. The Roundup Ready herbicide resistant crops don't control weeds. We have super weeds. Look at the farmlands of America, covered with super weeds. Half of the farmland is wasted. And they bring more and more lethal weedicides and herbicides, including the devastation that is causing to farmers. And on all of these, they are now leading legal cases and litigation. What we are facing now is the third green revolution, which is the merger of the old poison cartel and the new tech billionaires. So Silicon Valley and Hitler's IG Farben have merged now. And that is what we should be looking at. As I've written in my book, Making Peace with the Earth, which I wrote around the time when food had become a speculative commodity. If you remember 2008, the financial economy had collapsed. And it's the Mediterranean countries that bore the worst brunt. You know, Spain collapsed, Portugal, Italy, France, Greece. And many of these countries have not recovered. Greece has definitely not recovered. And that's when those who had speculated on loans and housing realized there's nothing more secure than food and nothing more secure than land. So they are now grabbing land, and billionaires like Gates are the biggest landlords in America, and they're looking for land grab all over the world. And this is what we'll be discussing in the financialization of nature, financialization of agriculture. But they're doing much more. They're doing much more because, like in the first green revolution, they said, oh, the soil is an empty container. It needs chemical fertilizers. Without chemical fertilizers that are made by the same process that made explosives, we cannot grow food. What we have instead is dead soils, new greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide, dead zones in the ocean, and impoverished farmers for debt. There's enough nitrogen in the soil. It just has to be picked up, but only organic systems can pick it up. That's what agroecology is. 50% of the greenhouse gases come from an industrial globalized system of food production and distribution. About 75% of all the desertification and water crisis is linked to this totally non-sustainable system. In terms of poverty and dispossession, this is what's driving farmers' dispossession because of debt. 75% chronic diseases come from the same bad food system. Now, on the other hand, you have agroecology. So here's a 100-year-old mistake made by the poison cartel, imposed on the world. And you have instead thousands of years of farming, 60,000 in Australia, 10,000 in my land, 10,000 years in Amazonia. We are farmers. And as small farmers, people have lived on the same land for centuries. This is what the British realized. On the same 2-acre plot, the same farmer, generations before, had farmed, leaving the soil richer, leaving the biodiversity richer from one wild grass, 200,000 rice varieties. This is true agroecology. This is regeneration. And the FAO has made it so clear that 80% of the food we eat comes from small farms, which use only 20 to 25% of the land. The land that is under industrial agriculture, about 75%, provides only about 20% of the food, and that too bad food that's making us very sick, including invading into the Amazon, including invading into the into the Indonesian rainforest. And that's where the new epidemics and pandemics are coming from. Even the new infectious diseases are a result of an agribusiness model based on corporate control. And the tragedy is the same people who give poisons, give us cancer, also own the cancer drugs. They are big pharma. Big poison and big pharma are the same. The same people who invade into the Amazon and create new infectious diseases gain hugely with vaccines and patented medicine. So for them, it's a perfect system for money making. For the earth is losing, farmers are losing, and ordinary people are losing. The climate solution lies in returning to the earth. It lies in recognizing the earth is living. It lies in recognizing that small farms are more photosynthetically efficient, are more biodiversity intensive, not chemical intensive, and therefore they produce more nutrition per acre, and definitely not more profits per acre. But profits anyway are related to subsidies. Half of Europe's tax money goes to subsidize chemical industry and factory farms. We must end this subsidy of an unviable, unsustainable, unjust system that is killing people in every way. We are now at a threshold where we have a climate emergency, an extinction emergency, a health emergency, hunger emergency. 11 people are dying per minute because of hunger, worse than the virus deaths. It is time to wake up and see ecological systems produce more food, biodiversity produces more food, small farms produce more food, and that is what we have to defend. That is the movement of food sovereignty. It is a movement for health, it's a movement for livelihoods, it's a movement for climate action, it's also a movement for working with other species as one earth family on one common earth through earth democracy, the deepest kind of democracy we can practice.
Muchas gracias, Vandana. La verdad
Thank you so much, Vandana. To be honest, hearing you speak and getting to know better how the food is being produced and what's the power that these big corporations have is a bit scary. But I want to remember the sentence you said, that agriculture is caring for the earth, tending to it. We can talk about that later on. And I wanted to introduce Sofia Monsalve. She is the secretary of FIAN International. They work for the right of food and nutrition. She coordinated the territories and food program for over 25 years, and she has a long experience. She's also a member of the International Panel of Sustainable Systems. Sofia, your report, capitalism and let me see if I can say it, the financialization of territories and food is very interesting. How do corporations operate with regards to the market of lands and basic foods? What is the impact of financial speculation in our food system? Well, thank you so much, Carol, and good afternoon or good morning, all of the people connected here with us. Thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for inviting me. I prepared a presentation, and I am going to share my screen. Let me see if I can share my screen so that I can show you my presentation. Let me see. Okay. I think you should be able to see it now, right? Yes, we can see it. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. So as you were saying, I want to say that this report, this document, is not just something that FIAN has done, but it is a collective work by a work group that belongs to the Platform for Food Sovereignty, where different social organizations such as Via Campesina and indigenous peoples organizations such as the International Council for Indian Treaties, or the Organization of Farmers, or the Alliance of Mobile Indigenous People, and fishermen organizations together with human rights organizations such as FIAN and Friends of the Earth. So this is a collective process, a reflection collective process, where we started thinking about the patterns and the main structural elements that have led to an increase of the destruction of rivers, of the earth, of forests, of fisheries, of many peoples and rural communities. So this report is actually a collective process, a reflection process. And as I was saying, it has that context to it. And we also wanted to get out of the fragmentation that we find ourselves in, because we all have our reflections on our own. So we fight against monocultures. So we are in our little bubble of no monocultures, how we fight against that, or we fight against mining and we only think about mining, or we fight against infrastructure projects and we're only in that bubble. We only think about big dams, for instance. But what we wanted to see was whether there are common patterns in all of these projects, all of these destructive projects. And that is why we looked at 20 different cases in all the regions the world over where we saw these different projects: privatization of the water, the development of real estate market, especially in peri-urban areas, projects for the preservation of nature that were supposed to be sustainable, but in the end, they simply take the land off of the communities, and they mercantilize as well nature with eco or agrotourism and so on, and then mining projects as well, and infrastructure development projects, economic corridors, special economic or financial zones, and so on. So we have gathered all of this information. All of these projects have been put together here. And the conclusion that we draw was that the financialization or financial capitalism is one of the main structural elements. I'm speaking way too fast, I believe, for the interpreter. I'm so sorry. So that are behind almost all of these processes. So the report would like to be a pedagogical report that tries to synthesize the investigations that have been carried out in this sense and to introduce it in a way that it can be used for a basis for discussion in all of this organizations. So explaining what's financial capitalism and financialization, we highlight 4 points. First of all, the domain of world finances over productive economy. So agriculture, manufacturing, services industry. We have also considered a scenario where profit is mainly made in virtual areas of financial markets. I can show you some files where you can get an idea of this. And what does that mean? We also have looked at the logic where profit needs to be done in a way that money makes more money. And obviously this is a highly speculative mechanism, and it has its origin in neoliberal policies of deregulation of the financial sector, which took place at the end of the 70s in the UK with Margaret Thatcher, and in Chile and in the US during Reagan's mandate. So that you get an idea of what's the dominion of finances and the real economy, we see that in 1980, the financial sector only represented 120% of the world GDP. You see that figure has increased in the 90s and in the 2000s. These are figures for 2010, which we have in our report. And we are currently at a stage where the financial sector is 300 times bigger than real economy. Okay, so let's continue. We also explained what are the mechanisms that allow for this financial capitalism to take place. And we highlight 4 things. We have created new classes of assets. It's obviously necessary to turn objects that weren't in the financial circuit into investment objects or assets. And that is how we see that the lands, waters, oceans, forests have become investment objects. And this financial class is really smart, and they always have new ideas. 2-3 weeks ago, I read the news that said that the stock exchange in New York has created a new mechanism, a new investment instrument, which is called natural asset companies. What this means is that we are no longer going to market with fragments of land, but they're also going to be selling complete territories, because a company of natural assets will be able to sell whole ecosystems. So this digs deeper into this development, and it is quite worrisome, as I told you. This is one of the news that we got from the New York stock market. And there are new financial instruments that have been created, such as, for instance, the derivatives and the bonds, that insurance for the future. It's what Vandana was saying with regards to the speculation of food that started in 2008, because big companies were investing in the price of food. And obviously they thought that prices were going to increase, and that had disastrous consequences for the population because they depended on the import of food. So we create new markets, and that together with those new assets, new instruments, for instance, the derivative market and carbon emission markets and different markets. And these new actors that we are not aware of, because I think that we are all very much aware of Monsanto, Cargill, Syngenta, etc., are our main adversaries. But these new financial actors that control many of those companies are in the shadows, and we don't know them very well. But these are asset management companies, investment funds, insurance companies. And in the next slide, I wanted to show you the names of these new actors, these companies. Or no, it's not going to the next one. Okay, so we start with the hubs. This is a slide that was created by the Transnational Institute that also was part of this collective effort. They issued different reports on this topic. And here we see what are the main financial hubs. We highlight the ones in the US, in the UK, in Germany, Luxembourg, and etc. And this gives us an idea of where they are in the world. And the next slide. No, I think I went too far. So this is a slide that shows financial havens, tax havens. We had the revelation of the Pandora Papers with the new update of what is happening in these tax havens. And these are data from 2019. I could not compare it with the Pandora Papers, but we find Luxembourg once again, Cayman Islands, Hong Kong, the British Virgin Islands, Jersey, Cyprus, and Bermuda and Mauritius as the main tax havens, where all of these capitals are not paying any tax. They don't pay for, they don't go through any political control or legal control, and their profit is hidden here. And that is why we have this system, which has been created for capitals to be hidden, all sorts of capitals that come from corruption, etc. Okay, so let's go back to the starting point and how all of this is linked to the reality of territories. This slide wants to show what are the spider webs of investment that we would find in a case such as the one of the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is palm oil. And in green, you see the company. And then we see all these little spider webs of investors, of companies that have part of the investment, but that fund is controlled by another fund, and then another fund, and another fund, and all of these funds, or most of those funds, are in these tax havens. So this is a system that has been deliberately designed to evade any sort of control. And this has a great impact in the way that we organize ourselves to face this problem, because understanding the structure of ownership and who controls a certain project in many of these cases is almost an investigation project. You need really, you need funds to be able to understand all of this spider web and all of its implications. And I would like to end with a case in Paraguay. Paraguay, you know, is one of the countries that has suffered a dramatic transformation during the last 10 years due to this sort of dynamic. The Gran Chaco is one of the region with more deforestation in the world, so that there can be extensive livestock farming and soy production. And we have been here collaborating with organizations from Paraguay, trying to identify these projects. This is the PAICO project, 146,000 hectares in Paraguay. It is the biggest landowner in Paraguay. And here we identified that 85% of this investment is controlled by the Euro-American Finance Fund, and 15% is controlled by the Cooperation for Development, the KfW. So part of these problematic trends have made for cooperation for development of the northern countries has ended up being a facilitator of this process, this financialization process. And in the German case, the Pandora Papers have actually revealed that this German bank, which is a public bank, has been involved and has been sentenced in the case of a bank that was laundering money in Panama. So here we see what is the scale of the problem of this system of financialization, or as we call it, clandestine capitalism. And I would like to end with this by highlighting that this is a hidden system to accumulate wealth in an extreme way, and it is outside of any political or legal control. And I want to really highlight this. And the other characteristic that we think needs to be also highlighted is the fact that this clandestine capitalism system is a violent system. So all of these processes of destruction, of ecological destruction and social destruction might sound abstract, market stocks and digital instruments, but in the life of people, this is materialized with paramilitaries, with armed bands, the paramilitary, the armed bands, the army, the police, getting the communities out of their lands in a violent way. And I think that, well, this is a reflection that I wanted to share with you today, because it's very important to take this into account, and so that we can ask ourselves the question, how are we going to answer to all of this? The problem is not just a corporation's problem, but also a financial system, which is the one that we could say is the puppet master of all of these corporations. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sofia. Listening to what you
cuenta de todo lo que no sabemos sobre lo que hay realmente del sistema.
Behind the system, this food system that we have, and that the transparency is something that is lacking in everything that has to do with this food system. And I would like to give the floor to our last panelist, Geneviève Savigny. She is a member of the European Economic and Social Committee on behalf of her trade union, La Confédération Paysanne. She is the national secretary of this confederation. She has been part of Via Campesina, and for 8 years she was in the coordination committee working on food and agricultural policy. Geneviève, you know very well the work that is being done by small and medium-sized farmers facing the corporate power, especially those who are committed to agroecology. So what situation do they find themselves when facing these big corporate monsters? So how does the CAP reform stand with the From Farm to Fork strategy and the Next Generation funds? How will they affect agroecology? Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so good evening, and thank you for inviting us. First, I was member of the Economic and Social Committee. I'm not anymore since last year, but I'm still very much involved with the European coordination Via Campesina. And of course, I'm still a farmer working on my farm. And I must say that to defend small and medium farmers, peasants and rural workers is really a permanent struggle, especially in Europe, well, all over the world. But I think in Europe, we are at the forefront of we are about in the forefront of the battlefield with the big corporations. Although it is not as violent maybe in some places, because we have policies, and those policies are where the struggles are for many of us, because we need all the time to be struggling, especially at European level, with European policies. And in those policies, you can see the power balance. I will give the example of the farm to fork strategy, which is one of the policy of the European Union, of the European Commission. It is part of the Green Deal, which has for objective to be carbon neutral in 2050. And the farm to fork strategy concerned the question of food and farming, with the aim of being more sustainable. So for ECVC, the objectives are quite good, as we can see that there are, for instance, some objectives to reduce the use of pesticides, to reduce the leaks of fertilizers like nitrogen, and also the use of antimicrobial products. So all the objectives are quite interesting. One problem, the first problem is that first the CAP was decided before the farm to fork strategy was published, and there were already struggles, so not to include it. We wanted to include, we wanted the measures in the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, to be in line with the objectives of the farm to fork strategy. But of course, the ones that are representing the agribusiness sector, to put it a bit short, they didn't want, because they said, oh, it's going to change the rules, so it's not possible now. So we cannot change the rules now. And so there is this first question. There is still some possibilities, because the CAP has been voted for Europe, but now each country has to decide and to discuss on a strategic plan, on a national strategic plan. So in each country, the authorities, the ministries, have to organize discussions and to decide what will be the special measures to make to have some measures good for the ecology, for in the first pillar, that is a pillar that is direct funding for farmers. And there are some measures and they can adopt to be more sustainable. So this is another place where we have to struggle, because of course we want to promote agroecology, we want to promote grassland, less fertilizers, hedges, and so on. But of course, the mainstream farmers or the mainstream farming sector, they want as little changes as possible, because it is really their goal, no change. There is a kind of balance where they are used to getting subsidies, direct payments, and they don't want this system to change. So it is also, we have, for instance, some members in Italy, they have proposed a whole set of measures for agroecology, and that would go mostly for smaller farms. But it is not sure that it will be accepted. And some of our farmers, for instance, in I think it is in Ireland and in Romania, their first struggle is to be accepted on the table of discussion, because it's not the right to take place in discussions is not effective for all of us in all countries. And then the countries will have to send their projects to the European Commission in December. So this is one of our struggles. To go back to the farm to fork strategy, at the moment there is also a discussion, because the Parliament is doing a report on the farm to fork, and with quite good vision of progressive vision. But of course, the agrobusiness sector, the COPA-COGECA, which represents larger farms in Europe, but also agrobusiness like Food Drink Europe and so on, they are pushing, well, in fact, they are not pushing, they are pulling, so that the report is not adopted now. it should be voted next week, but in fact they are pushing so that it is postponed until November or later, because they are asking for another study, because in their they have seen a study saying that with this farm to fork strategy, the production in Europe is probably going to lower, to decrease the production of food. But we say as Via Campesina, but no, with such methods, with agroecological methods, with less fertilizers, we can produce more food. Well, for several reasons. Well, the first one is that usually on larger farms, you produce commodities. You don't produce food directly. What you produce is products for the market, for the broad market, for export market, not for feeding the community. So this is one answer. And the other answer is yes, maybe it will decrease a little the production, but then you need to have, we want to have more farmers, more young farmers setting up farms to be able to produce closer to consumers. And also there is also some change in regime in the way the people feed themselves, that makes less the land where you need to use less land. So those are some present struggles where we are working on at the moment. And maybe this is maybe the first points I wanted to stress for the first presentation. And you asked me about these recovery funds and so on, but maybe you have noticed that they are made for larger companies. That for small farmers, it is usually very difficult to access funds, because very often you need to be above a certain amount of money, a certain amount of subsidies of projects to be able to get those funds. So it is not really it's not really for us. What we are seeing now is what we need now is really to have more concerns of countries and policymakers for smaller farmers, because at the moment we are not very visible. So it's this is our main struggle, to make clear that food is produced all over the world by smaller farmers, not by large companies. But in Europe, there is this vision that agriculture is done for the market, an open market, international market. And when they are speaking about a more sustainable food system, at the same time, they are also signing trade agreements. They are discussing agreement with Mercosur and so on, which are completely going against this will to be more sustainable. And my last comment is also this very dangerous trend also to make a kind of parallel between more sustainable and digital transition. So you always hear in the Brussels bubble talk about the green and digital transition. And this is really a very dangerous thing, because when they speak about digital farming, and they are speaking about big data, artificial intelligence, drones working in fields, but also new GMOs, new seeds production. And so this is really a mainstream discourse that we have to fight against. And I was very happy to hear Mrs. Vandana Shiva speak about this in the first place, that now we have those big players, those big GAFA that are in the scene. We don't see them all the time because they are quite, they know where to do their lobby work, but we know that they are also really behind the scene. So this is my first very broad presentation of the situation for small farmers.
Merci, Geneviève, por tu presentación. Queda claro que la soberanía alimentaria es
Quite clearly, food sovereignty is a world fight. we are fighting here in the Global South and in any other place. I wanted to thank you all for respecting the time and for your presentations. And I would like now to ask you a second question. Quite recently, we have had, and actually one of our participants was saying it in the chat, we have seen different food systems that have had a horrible result. Now we will have the climate summit where we will talk about agroecology. So how's this movement, how is the food sovereignty movement responding to these proposals in all of these spaces? You could maybe respond for 2-3 minutes, maybe even Vandana could start, followed by Sophia and then Geneviève.
Yeah. I think the invisible powers of the asset management firms, the BlackRocks and the Vanguards, where the billionaire money is there, and they are turning the whole world into an asset for them, for speculation, for extraction. I think we need to pay much more attention to that concentration of power, and they're going beyond any regulation, a point that has been made by both the other panelists. So they've hijacked the Food Summit, they've hijacked the Climate Summit, and they've hijacked the Biodiversity Summit. If you look, I mean, there's this Pat Dasgupta report, which basically says biodiversity is an asset. Biodiversity is not life, biodiversity is not the web of life. They've kind of made the Convention on Biological Diversity disappear, like they've made the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change disappear. How does agriculture fit into the climate debate? Firstly, 50% of all greenhouse gases, as I said earlier, come from an industrial globalized system of farming. Long food miles, long supply chains, huge chemical intensive fertilizers, large amount of conversion of forests into agribusiness, as was shown on Paraguay. We look at any land, forests are being chopped for agribusiness. So all of that added is 50%. 14 is from agriculture, but the rest is from conversion of forests, the unnecessary packaging, and long distance miles. How do we solve it? We solve it through agroecology. Agroecology, 50% of the climate problem is bad food, corporate agriculture. 100% of the climate solution is in the hands of small farmers who take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere by working with the plants, who have the power of photosynthesis, take the sunlight, take the carbon dioxide, turn it into carbohydrates, the molecule of life, and give us oxygen, and give us water, and give us soil. You add all of this, I mean, look at the power of the earth to bring temperature down from 290 degrees down to 13. Carbon dioxide down from 4,000 parts per million to 270. That is the power small farmers work with. I call it co-creation with the earth, co-creation with biodiversity, co-creation with the soil organism. That is agroecology. And in it lie all the solutions of the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the food and hunger crisis. We're going to get rubbish out of Glasgow because it's all going to be based on this man's recipes. Bill Gates, how to avoid climate disaster. Carbon suction, not by the leaf, but by giant machines. 5 trillion subsidy. He's investing in it. More fertilizers, more and more fertilizers, which are responsible for a greenhouse gas 300 times more damaging to the climate. And fake food. He's investing in a big way in fake food, which will require more industrial farms to produce raw materials of carbohydrates and amino acids and proteins rather than food. So they are making food disappear, and they're planning farming without farmers, food without farms. That's the vision Silicon Valley has. That's the vision the billionaires have. And the digital agriculture connections, I just want to say, you know, the language, I had a debate in FAO, and you know, the FAO person talked about dematerialization. We are dematerializing seed because now we can do genomic mapping. No, a genome map doesn't make the seed, it merely maps. Just like colonial maps did not make the land, they just stole the land. Maps are meant for stealing. Genomic maps are the new biopiracy. And the word of dematerialization is so wrong because digital economies require huge amounts of energy consumption. Energy consumption, every digital technology hasn't even been looked at. This is a hyper emission generating technology. It's not dematerialization. So they're throwing rubbish into our faces, and they have elevated themselves beyond national democracies and beyond the international UN system. Basically, our challenge is, how do you rein in rogue capital? How do you rein in rogue corporations? That's our work. It's a work of democracy. It's a work of people's rights. It's a work of defense of the earth.
Sofía.
Sí, bien, gracias, Carol. Bueno, yo seguí de cerca.
I have been following up closely the whole summit process, and I was part of the conglomerate of organizations, social organizations, who were opposed to the summit and who resisted to it. And we actually decided to boycott it. And the food sovereignty was the leader in this boycott. And then other organizations added themselves to it, such as scientists and researchers and even people and organizations that worked within the summit. And the problem is what has already been said is the bias, the corporate bias, the privatization of public institutions, international public institutions. That's what happened. And we understand that corporations know that they have a problem, a health problem, an ecological problem, a food problem. So we understand that one of their main objectives was to try and use our terminology, to co-opt our solutions. And in the end, agroecology was one of the main solutions, and that is what has been said. And there is now an action coalition of different stakeholders. So that means that supposedly agroecology is now promoted by some corporations, and it is promoted by these organizations, these organizations that are dedicated to preservation. But Via Campesina is not in this coalition. So one would wonder, but what sort of agroecology are they going to do? Via Campesina is not there. So yes, there is, due to this lack of legitimacy, such an obvious lack of legitimacy, they're doing everything that they can to put the United Nations stamp on whatever they do so that they can get their authorization, you could say. That is what they're doing. And the United Nations, unfortunately, and quite shamefully, trying to solve its lack of financing problems and lack of political support, they have decided to sell themselves to corporations. That is really the situation that we find ourselves in. And today, the plenary session of the World Food Safety Committee has taken place, and this proposal has been given the support of the Commission. So it's a very dark scenario, but we mustn't stay there. We need to think about the possibilities and the solutions. And I think that within the possibility of organizing against the summit, we have strengthened the convergence processes of different movements. For instance, we had lots of exchanges with organizations that fight within the biodiversity framework. So we were closer together, trying to understand what is going to happen in the food summit, what is going to happen in the biodiversity convention, what is going to happen in the COP26 in Glasgow. We will be present there. We are going to say what happened during the summit. We also have a relationship with the Finances Forum for Development, because there are different debates that are important that we have to follow closely, such as agreeing tax rates for multinationals. This is something that is being tackled. So G20 is proposing something that is insufficient, but at least the topic is on the table. And there is a great civil society movement, for instance, all of the anti-debt movement that is really pushing forward so that tax havens are closed, so that in the end, these people pay the taxes that they need to pay. And that gives us some wind, put some wind under our wings. And in that convergence, we have to say that food is really important. Agroecology and food sovereignty are important topics. They are getting more and more importance and more strength in this new convergence of movements. So this is a construction process that will take its time. It's slow, but I think that we are on the right path along that way, and we hope to be getting some support to protect the territories and territorial autonomies, because I think that the first resistance is there, the one that communities are defending. And we see that agroecology is giving them autonomy. It was the answer during the pandemic, not just with regards to traditional drugs to strengthen the immunological system, but there is quite a lot of resonance and demand by communities and territories for agroecology. So that is what we are doing, and those are the activities that we need to keep on doing. Thank you. Thank you, Sofia. Geneviève, what do you think about these spaces? What is your opinion with regards to these spaces?
Yes, it is. It is quite obvious that those places have been taken over by the big corporation, and there is a big risk of high-level greenwashing. So for us, we do not expect much. We just use those places for communication to again and again repeat what the situation is and how those big corporations are ruining the world, and how they are bringing forward false solution. So it is what we are trying to do is to explain what's happening really. So well, it was a bit different with the Food System Summit, because the Food System Summit is really the core of our action, and it was really going against the present situation, with the multilateral system, where for food issues are tackled at the Committee on Food Security with the FAO in Rome, with the Rome system, and then the corporations and the World Economic Forum signed an agreement with the Secretary of the United Nations to make a kind of partnership. And so this Food System Summit was part of this partnership. And it was launched by, not as it is usually those food system summit, this food summit were decided by countries by a vote, where one country, one vote. But with this forum, it was launched by the World Economic Forum and then by the United Nations Secretariat without a normal process. And for us, it was really violent to see that in the Committee on Food Security, Via Campesina, other social movements, small food producers, they have some space. And this space has been organized over the last 10 years in a way that we can have some kind of democratic space where we can express our vision in front of countries, and then countries decide on the system. But with this Food System Summit, it was all against our will. It was all against us somehow. And this is why Via Campesina, right from the beginning, said, no, this is not possible. This summit is illegitimate, and we don't want to participate. And it was very, very interesting that there was so much discussions with NGOs and with other organizations, with scientists. And at the end, there is a strong opposition to this summit, which is very positive, because it is a way to show what's happening, how those large corporations are trying to take over the world completely. And our resistance, I think, is really the beginning of a broader resistance to what they are trying to do. So this is why it was so important to us, and it is still very important. So we are following what's happening in Rome now with the present session of the Committee on Food Security, and then we see how we can continue to struggle and to fight against this corporations taking the system over. And but in a way, it's a good thing to see that they are not so powerful as they need to also take the governance in their hands. So far, they are the economic power, but now they also want the political power. And it's a way for them to take the political power over the countries through the United Nations system, and we see them everywhere now. So it's with food, through food systems, we are struggling against them. So it's a good place of resistance.
Gracias, Genevieve. Me voy a quedar contigo porque hay
Genevieve, I'm going to stay with you because there is a very specific question that they're asking us on the chat. I don't know if you know about the case of Via Campesina in Spain, or if you don't know about this, I don't know what they're saying this, but they're saying that there are members of Via Campesina in Spain who are not in favor of the farm to fork strategy, and they are aligned with industrial agriculture. I don't know if you know about this, or if we could give an answer to Garbancita.
In fact, I don't know the very precise story. I know that in Spain, our member is a confederation, is a federation with different regions, and sometimes in some areas they may have a little slightly different vision from the national vision. But at the end, their vision, they fully share the vision of Via Campesina, of the COAG. The COAG share the vision of Via Campesina, of ECVC. Only now we have the general vision about this the farm to fork strategy, and it is very important to see in the if the objectives are really well put into practice. So maybe this is where there can be discussions. But I want to say more, because then I don't know about the details.
Bueno, gracias en cualquier caso, Genevieve.
Yes, Genevieve. I am reading here on the chat that after the presentation, some people have a pessimistic vision of the situation, seeing what the evolution has been and what things have been like and what people's attitudes are. Well, we have a bitter aftertaste after these presentations, and Sergio was saying if we could find enough people to pressure and change the model. And is it really easy to change that model? Because we don't seem to find any alternative model. I mean, it's true that we have agroecology, but it's still not a model that is being imposed. So could other people join this fight to change the model? Vandana, if you wish, you can start answering the question, but this question is for the three of you.
If I can just say one word, or no?
Should Genevieve want to say one word and then I come in?
No, it's same. Didn't know.
Perfecto. Lo hacemos así entonces. Genevieve.
Ahead, please.
But in fact, when you speak about agroecology, it also speaks about shorter food chains and direct relationship between consumers and farmers. And in this part, I think everybody is concerned, because you can go to buy food at the local market. You can get involved in a community supported agriculture with. So you can do something as consumer, as citizen in your community. So this is also where you can start building agroecology, peasant agroecology from the start. So this is also something you can do without policies, just as it is now. You can start.
Gracias. Vandana.
Yeah. So we all eat, don't we? And we all can be the change by beginning with changing how we eat, especially given that we are increasingly being fed junk food, subsidized to make it cheap, even though it's very costly to produce. It's costly for the planet, it's costly for the farmers, because the farmers' price has been undercut, and it's costly for our health. You know, trillions and trillions is being spent by people on the chronic disease epidemic. So if you were to look at that high cost of disease that junk food is causing, and that fake food that Bill Gates wants to bring us will cause, we've got to begin with what we eat. And therefore, we can't be casual about understanding the food system. And if it means understanding that giant powers have become so hungry for our food, yeah, they are limitlessly hungry, they will never be satiated. I don't think you should get depressed about it, but you should organize around it. I mean, to be taking into account the power of the opponent is to begin to organize. The third is the only real food is that which comes from small farms, which care for the land, regenerate biodiversity, and grow real food, because real food goes from soil, not in these high-rise buildings with hydroponics and artificial food and huge artificial light. And it's a negative energy equation, which will actually add to greenhouse gases, because what is greenhouse gases and climate change? Huge energy inputs from non-renewable sources. More energy inputs than you can generate. What is regenerative ecological agriculture and organic farming and agroecology? Different names for the same thing. It is using the energy of living systems to create more energy. It's called endosomatic energy rather than exosomatic. It's negative entropy rather than positive entropy. So the science is with us, and we should celebrate. Our practice is with us. The fact that today we were not talking about this success and that success and this output and that is because it's important you come to know about the concentration of power. Because if you don't understand it, you will never, you will constantly sink into the next step. It's like the story of the frog, yeah? That if it's put into hot water, it jumps out. But if it's warmed slightly, it burns, it boils to death. So, you know, the hot water that we've given you today is for you to jump out of that industrial corporate food system and become part of an ecological, fair, short chain system, a localized food system. It's the only system that will save the world. It's the only system that will ever bring you healthy food. It's the only system that will be democratic. And no reason why you shouldn't pass this. You don't have to model for a model to drop from the skies. You will create it through the way you eat.
Sofía.
Sí.
Well, yes, I completely agree with Vandana, and I think that it's about reinventing our relationship between us and with nature. And food is basic, it's central. It's actually the most direct link that we can have. Nature becomes us and we become nature. So I think this fight, this battle for life and this reinvention goes through lots of dimensions, politics, organize ourselves and the different dimensions that this has, but also it goes through the cultural aspect of things. We have to recover those community bonds when we feed ourselves. That is very important. We have to realize that our communities, our families, that's where we feed ourselves, and that is where we create those bonds, those links, and challenge this idea that food is a merchandise. We have gotten used to finding food in supermarkets, but that's not the case. It should not be the case. So we have to reinvent all of these social relations. We have to reconnect with nature. We have to go back to feeding ourselves through farmers. But for instance, where I live in a little village in Germany, and we still have fruit trees that were commonly owned, and they still exist. I mean, you could simply get your fruit from your tree. So we have to reinvent social behaviors of caring for the tree and picking the apples, preparing all of that life. So I think that cultural aspect is a main aspect, and also the fight against this industrial process is also important. And I think that fighting to have more time for our life and for the care, for all the care system is also very important, and the redistribution or understanding what it means to feed ourselves well and cook, because it mustn't be just in the hands of women and girls. Men also have to do their part of the care. of the caregiving. I know it's difficult, but we have to care for our kids. We have to care for the sick, and we know that feeding is very important in that sense. And we see that hospitals are filled with food that is useless. So there are lots of things that need to be reinvented, socially reinvented. But what we see at FIAN is that during the pandemic, there were lots of experiences of solidarity that fill us with hope. I am from Colombia, from Latin America, and I have lived in Ecuador, in Brazil, in Colombia, and we see that people have been bartering. People have been bartering. These were solidarity practices that were very important during this emergency situation, and we think that that's where we started reconfiguring these new relationships. And I think that we have to continue that road, and we mustn't lose hope. Thank you so much. I'm going to apologize because there are lots of questions on the chat, and I'm sure that I will not be able to ask all the questions. So I'll apologize beforehand because I know that there is lots of participation, and the time is limited. I would love to have more time, but we have as much time as we have, and that's it. And one of those dimensions could be education, and that maybe we could better educate with regards to sustainable agriculture. We could better educate our children from an early age. That could maybe be one of the pillars, one of the basic pillars to change the system. Do you think that that's the case? Do you know of any training or education program in any country where there is a solid initiative that is being put in place with regards to agroecology education, of caring for the land and taking care of the soil? For instance, in France, Geneviève, do you know of any program?
I know about programs at older age for the students that are in studying agriculture. There is some place for agroecology now. It's been on for I think about 6 or 8 years after our minister Stéphane Le Foll promoted agroecology. Well, it was not exactly our vision of agroecology, because to start with, he had 2 dimensions, technical and economical, and we said, well, it must be also social, like any sustainable farming. But so it is now part of the program of a school of agriculture, and also in the canteens of such schools. They are trying also to have short supply chain and to improve the quality of food. But I don't know for younger children so far, but I think one of the best way to teach children is to show them, just to do with them, do the shopping with them, and go on the market. I sell on the market every Saturday, and I see some customers. They come with their children, and they've been buying, doing shopping for years, and you know that it's a culture. And then you have the children who are aware of what food come from, and there is a link from the food and the producer. So I think this type of action is very important. And some schools, you know, they will have a garden and they will grow their own. And doing things for young children is probably the best way to learn. And then it is also something to bring forward at old ages, that this type of farming is really important, and this type of relationship with soil and nature. But it's coming. We must say that it's coming.
Sofía, a nivel Latinoamérica, que a lo mejor es lo que más...
Sofía, from a Latin point of view, which might be the part that you know best, do you think this is being included in education, or do you know of any interesting initiative that you could share with us? Well, yes, there are lots of movements, especially from the sector of the organization that work on public health. It is known that the obesity rates amongst children have rocketed in countries such as Colombia and Mexico and the US and even Germany. So in many, many countries, in India as well. I was reading, before I came here, I was reading that, well, I was actually talking about public health, And they were saying that even in India, there are more and more obese children. So there are lots of initiatives to protect children against the ads of fast food. And corporations are very clever, and they know that the taste, all of the emotions, all of these sensory memories that we have from childhood, that is the moment when you have to change their food habits. And that is why they invest so much in ads and advertising, digital advertising, and lots of different tricks so that children link their best memories to McDonald's, for instance. And so this is actually a field of confrontation in Latin America, such as, for instance, in Colombia. Fiat Colombia was very much committed to trying to pass a law that would forbid ads for fast food, for that sort of fast food. And it was not possible because that was going against the interests of those lobbies and publicity and so on. So it is very difficult, but there are more and more initiatives at this level. That's on the one hand, and there are lots of initiatives to protect the health of children. And at the same time, FIAN Colombia, for instance, since we couldn't do anything at the level of central government in Colombia, they started developing projects with municipalities. For instance, in the city of Cartagena de Indias, they had a very interesting project with one of the biggest public schools in Cartagena, where they had a whole education process with children so that they could reconnect with their roots, because most of the population in Cartagena come as a displaced population from the armed conflicts in the farming land. So they wanted to reconnect them with agroecology, with farming in the region, and demanding from the municipal government in Cartagena to guarantee programs to purchase from those organizations that produced food for snacks, for school snacks. And I think that there are lots of positive initiatives, such as Merienda Escolar in Brazil, that is linked to production by farming families. And there are lots of initiatives that are very interesting, but we have to be vigilant because, for instance, another big action that was developed during the summit was the food snack program. But I just wanted to highlight that the debate and the fight to win the hearts and the imagination of boys and girls is a very, very hard battle. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Sofia. Vandana, what do you think about the education element, the education component? Your microphone is off.
Yeah.
Gracias.
Well, I started to save seeds in 1987, and out of it grew the movement Navdanya, which means 9 seeds, but it also means the new gift of the commons, of the seeds. So we create community seed banks. But in the year 2000, we created the School of the Seed, which also is now grown into the Earth University. We've, anyway, over these 30 years, trained 1 million farmers. We work with 300 schools on eating right, on good food, on the roots of obesity, the power of the corporations. And, we've created a network of women farmers and organized women networks like Kudumshri and Seva, and we are 5 million. Yeah. So just the other day we got together and I'm getting letters. Yeah. Because for us, every moment of meeting is an education. Every moment of working with the land is learning from the earth. Every moment of organizing a food community is actually food education. And there's formal and informal. And one of our other very big movements is gardens in schools. Gardens of hope, we call them. And we also do this with the widows of the farmers who committed suicide. So the education component is vital because there is this subtle miseducation taking place through advertising and the propaganda machine. One thing we must take into account, and people shouldn't get depressed by it, but organize around it, is the media is controlled by the same money. Food is controlled by the same money. Agriculture is controlled by the same money. Big pharma is controlled by the same money. And they're controlling the UN system now. And that's why we need our own education and we need our own communication. And we need to really build food communities that are learning communities. Just one thing for those who want to know, the Learning Center, Navdanya, navdanya.org. If you go to navdanya.org at Earth University, you will find all the learnings and teachings we are engaged in. In fact, I gave my last lecture of a 2-week course on agroecology today.
Qué interesante.
So interesting. Well, it's 1846, and we want to be very punctual in concluding this session because, especially for Vandana, it's very, very late now. And we thank her for being still with us at this time, but I'm sure that she wants to rest. So I'm going to ask one last question from the audience, and then I will give the floor to all 3 speakers so that they can answer to one final question so that they can give us some hope or some inspiration before we close. They were saying on the chat that sometimes there is a dissociation between the people who live in the cities and the rural areas. Sometimes they don't know how food is produced, where food comes from, and there is this dissociation, and we are too separated. These people don't know what the agroecology system is. Do you think that this is a barrier when trying to change the model? And secondly, linked to this, what do you think about the community presence in urban areas in developed countries? Do you think we can, in a city, find these community models that you were talking about? Sophia, please take the floor in order to answer to this question this time. Okay, I think that that's the task, the chaos and violence that we are living, I believe, makes it urgent for us to recreate this fabric, this community fabric in all cities. And I think that it's just a matter of survival. And we have to be very creative here. And we have to, I mean, I live here and the youth are showing that they really wish to have this spiritual roots, and they want to reconfigure their lives. They want to have collective work and recover their communities. So I think that we are seeing this, and maybe it cannot be felt now, but I think it's very important that all of us commit to this work of rebuilding our communities. And now it is key for us to organize beyond the specific territories and the specific communities, but rather we have to have an international vision or an planetary interdependence vision. It's not between humans, but with all living beings. We have to understand that there is a connection, and we need to create new communities considering that. Geneviève.
Yes, I think the situation now is a bit special with this COVID crisis and the way it has been really tackled from above, and it has creating a strange situation, at least in France, and people are starting to think maybe a bit more about what's happening to them, what is their life about, what are they going to, and I really see that we are at kind of a crossword. There are 2 visions of the future. I think one is very high tech, and this is the vision of Bill Gates and so on. They want this high technology and everybody, this kind of transhumanism, something very, very high tech and very artificial, where with the wealth concentrated in the hands of not many people. And the others, I don't know about the others. And another vision, which is based on humanity, really on humanity and a better connection with the land, with the earth. And I think at the moment, people are getting more aware of this situation. And food is maybe the entry point, can be one entry point of reclaiming our sovereignty, but our sovereignty as community on our lives. I know it's a challenge because it is difficult, but people, I think, are more aware that it is a choice to make through food, but also through health, through lodging, through the way we consume and so on. And I see there is really space for this change. But as you know, it is very complicated at this moment because we are in a crisis. But we can go either one way or the other. And I hope we are all going to this more human future.
Barbara.
Food is the connector. You know, I call food the currency of life because what flows from the soil to the plants, through the bees, the pollen, through the animals, through our gut microbiome is nutrition and food. So in any case, even where there is a sense of separation and distancing, the reality of growing food and eating food is a connector. And what we have to, our work is to remove all the middlemen, you know, the middlemen of ultra processing, the middlemen of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and glyphosate. And that's what it, you know, that really is the food sovereignty struggle, to remove those who come in the way between the countryside and the eaters in the city. This rift is what Liebig, who's the father of modern organic chemistry, said, it's a metabolic rift and it's going to destroy society. We can't afford a metabolic rift between the growers of food and the eaters of food. That is now the food revolution we have to make. Bring this together. How do we do it? I know even in Spain, in France, everywhere it's there. People go into the community-supported agriculture schemes in the US. People go to the farmer. Young people go for weekends and learn that peanuts don't hang from trees, they grow underground. That the purple cow of Milka, is it? That is not a real cow, it's not purple, you know? So I think because we've been so dumbed down about our food in order to sell us rubbish, it is now to make everything an educational project, including going to the country. I mean, now there are all kinds of farm stays coming up, even in India. You know, people pay huge amounts just to take a bullock cart ride. And I was told they pay 100,000 rupees to see how a wooden cooking stove cooks chapatis in five-star restaurants in Mumbai. So we've reached rock bottom of stupidity and ignorance. And therefore, every connection we make between the city and the country can be exciting. It could be linked to tourism, to tours, to children's outings, the midday meal schemes, the food schemes that were talked about earlier. Everything is about connection and getting rid of the poisons, the toxics, the exploitation, the corporations, and then connecting.
Muchas gracias. Pues vamos a ir.
Thank you so much. So we're going to now close. I will ask you to please, well, you have talked about possible solutions. You have talked about what you think could be the alternatives. So I want you, if you don't mind, to ask you to tell us in just 1 minute, what would be your final words about whether it's possible to change the system and what a really sustainable system would be for the future of all of us and for the future of our planet. Geneviève?
1 minute is very difficult, but I think it is also all about reclaiming one's own life and trying to think about what is important and how to live. And food, of course, will be one of the central point of this. So, and once you are you have this vision, and then you can fight in the different struggles that are in front of you, because to achieve this, it can be political, it can be local with access to land for young farmers. So you have to get involved in what is at your hand and what you can really have action on. So it will depend on who you are, where you are. There is always something to do, and let's I would say let's do it. Let's do it.
Merci, Geneviève, tienes toda la razón, hagámoslo.
You're right, let's do it. So, Sophia, last words?
Bueno, yo quisiera
Well, I would like to
llamar a todas
call you all to unite, call you all to action, to contribute wherever you are, so that we can make our dreams come true, our expectations become true, so that we go back to a simpler life, but fuller with life and meaning. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sophia. Vandana, 1 minute for you as well, so that you can tell us a bit what hope could look like.
You know, the alternative is much bigger, actually. It's just not looked at. Just like we don't look at the productivity of small farm, we don't look at the biodiversity. And the alternative is growing from the ground up. And then you've got this absurd models being forced from the top down with subsidies and coercion and lies and propaganda. So I have huge confidence about the alternative because it is growing. And it's the shift from monocultures to biodiversity. It's a shift from greed to care. It's a shift from extractive, globalized, profit-driven economies to localized economies that are circular and giving back. It's a shift from measuring empty yield of nutritionally empty toxic food and saying we have more yield to looking at nutrition per acre. And our work in Navdani has shown we could feed 2 times the world's planet by regenerating biodiversity, protecting our small farms, and taking care of the earth.
Pues muchísimas gracias. Quiero dar las gracias.
I wanted to thank our wonderful speakers. It has been a privilege to listen to you all. Thank you so much for participating in this 4th session of this series dedicated to a fair and sustainable food system. I wanted to also thank those who allow for this to be organized, which is the Green European Foundation, Casa Encendida, and Transición Verde. And I would like to remind you all who have written your questions on the chat that not only can you access this video and the rest of the videos of this session, we will have a last session on October 21st. In this case, we will talk about the transformative potential of agroecology. We will have amazing speakers as well who will tell us how a new model could be possible instead of the industrial model. And we will also be giving some examples here in Spain. And I am so sorry I was so strict with regards to time, but it's true that being able to have such diverse people from different parts in the world sometimes limits us, and we have to adapt to their timetables. And with no further ado, I wish you the best of evenings and thank you for participating. Thank you very much.